December 24, 1944. Deep in the mountains of Colorado, behind 3 layers of barbed wire and armed guards, sits Camp Carson, one of America's most secure prisoner of war facilities. Inside Barrack 7, a man named Kenji Nakamura sits alone in the corner, his back pressed against the cold wooden wall. His eyes are hard as flint, his jaw clenched with the kind of rage that has been burning for 3 long years. Kenji isn't just any prisoner. He's a former Imperial Japanese Navy pilot who once soared through Pacific skies, raining death on American ships at Pearl Harbor. The same hands that now shake with cold once gripped the controls of a Zero fighter, diving through anti-aircraft fire without a moment's hesitation. He was shot down over the Solomon Islands in 1942, dragged from the wreckage of his burning plane more dead than alive, and has spent every day since plotting his escape or his revenge. The other prisoners give him a wide berth. Even among enemy soldiers, Kenji has earned a reputation. His attempted escape 7 times. 7 times he's been dragged back, each time more defiant than the last. The guards call him the Ghost because he moves through the camp like a specter, silent and dangerous. His fellow POWs whisper that he still believes the Emperor is divine, that surrender is a concept that simply doesn't exist in his vocabulary. Tonight is different, though. Tonight, something in the air feels electric, charged with an energy that makes even Kenji's hardened exterior crack just slightly. Through the thin walls of the barracks, he can hear something he hasn't heard in years: American soldiers singing. Not the usual crude songs or military chants, but something softer. Something that makes his chest tighten in a way he doesn't understand. The sound drifts closer, and Kenji realizes it's not just any singing. It's Christmas carols. The Americans are celebrating their Christian holiday, and their voices carry through the frozen mountain air like ghosts from another world. He tries to block it out, presses his hands against his ears, but the melody seeps through his defenses like water through cracks in stone. Jingle Bells floats past his window, followed by White Christmas. Each song feels like a knife twisted in his gut, not because they're American songs, but because they remind him of something he's tried desperately to forget. Home. Family. The life he had before the war consumed everything he once held dear. You see, what the Americans don't know, what Kenji has never told anyone, is that he wasn't always a warrior. Before Pearl Harbor, before the Zero fighter planes and the kamikaze missions, Kenji Nakamura was a schoolteacher in a small village outside Hiroshima. He taught children to read and write, helped them with their arithmetic, and every Christmas, yes, Christmas, because even in Japan some celebrated this foreign holiday, he would organize a small concert where his students would sing Western songs they'd learned. His favorite student was a little girl named Yuki, no more than 8 years old, with pigtails that bounced when she laughed and a voice like a silver bell. Every December, she would beg him to teach her one more American Christmas song, and he would stay after school, sitting at the old piano in the corner of the classroom, helping her learn the words phonetically even though neither of them fully understood what they meant. But that was before the war. Before the military came to his village looking for educated young men to serve the empire. Before he traded his teacher's chalk for a pilot's wings and his students' laughter for the screams of diving engines and exploding ships. Now, as silent night begins to drift through the barracks windows, Kenji feels something inside his chest crack open like ice breaking on a frozen pond. The melody is hauntingly familiar, and suddenly he's back in that classroom, watching little Yuki struggle with the English pronunciation, her face scrunched up in concentration as she tried to wrap her tongue around foreign words. The American guards are singing it beautifully, their voices harmonizing in a way that makes the simple melody sound like a prayer. But then, something extraordinary happens. Something that will haunt Kenji Nakamura for the rest of his life. From the guard tower, a voice breaks away from the others. Not singing in English this time, but in perfect, clear Japanese. The same song, the same melody, but in his mother tongue. Kiyoshi kono yoru, hoshi wa hikari. Kenji's blood turns to ice water in his veins. His hands begin to tremble, not from cold, but from something far more dangerous, recognition. Not just of the language, but of the voice itself. It's impossible. It can't be. But as the Japanese words of Silent Night float down from the guard tower like snow, Kenji knows with absolute certainty that he's heard this voice before. The voice belongs to Private First Class Thomas Wheeler, though Kenji doesn't know the name yet. What Kenji doesn't know is that Wheeler spent 2 years as a missionary in Japan before the war, learned the language from Buddhist monks and Christian converts in remote mountain villages. What Kenji doesn't know is that Wheeler volunteered for duty at Camp Carson specifically because he wanted to help rehabilitate Japanese prisoners, believing that understanding and compassion could succeed where hatred and force had failed. What Kenji doesn't know is that Private Wheeler has been watching him for months, studying his behavior, trying to understand what drives this particular prisoner's relentless rage. Wheeler has read Kenji's file, knows about the escape attempts, the fights, the absolute refusal to cooperate with interrogators. But Wheeler also knows something the other guards don't. He recognizes the look in Kenji's eyes because he's seen it before. In those mountain villages in Japan, Wheeler had met other men like Kenji. Men who carried themselves like warriors but had the gentle hands of scholars. Men who spoke softly to children but could kill with their bare hands if necessary. Men caught between two worlds, between the person they once were and the person war had forced them to become. As Wheeler's voice continues the Japanese version of Silent Night, other guards join in with the English lyrics, creating a haunting bilingual harmony that seems to bridge the gap between two nations, two languages, two hearts that have been hardened by 3 years of brutal warfare. But for Kenji, crouched in the corner of Barrack 7, the world has suddenly become very small and very personal. Because that voice, that perfect pronunciation, the way Wheeler shapes each syllable with careful reverence, it reminds him of someone. Someone he thought he'd never hear again. It reminds him of Father Matthews. Father Matthews was an American missionary who had lived in Kenji's village for 15 years before the war. He'd learned Japanese not just fluently, but lovingly, with the same careful attention to pronunciation and respect for the language that Kenji is hearing now. Father Matthews had been like a grandfather to many of the village children, including little Yuki, and when Christmas came each year, he would teach them carols in both languages, believing that music could unite hearts across any divide. Father Matthews had been Kenji's friend. More than a friend, he'd been a mentor, a confidant, someone who understood that being Japanese didn't mean being incapable of appreciating Western culture, and being Christian didn't mean abandoning the wisdom of the East. They would spend hours discussing philosophy, literature, the nature of faith and duty, and the terrible choices that war forces upon good men. When the military came for Kenji, Father Matthews had been the only one brave enough to speak up, to suggest that perhaps the Empire needed teachers more than pilots. But Kenji had already made his choice. He kissed the old priest's forehead, promised to return after the war, and walked away from everything that had made him human. Now, listening to this unknown American soldier sing in perfect Japanese, Kenji feels the walls he's built around his heart beginning to crumble. The voice carries the same love for the language that Father Matthews had possessed, the same respect for pronunciation that came not from military training but from genuine affection for the people who spoke it. The song ends, but the silence that follows is more devastating than any bomb Kenji ever dropped. In that silence, he hears the ghost of little Yuki's laughter, Father Matthews' gentle corrections, the sound of chalk on blackboard and children reciting their lessons. He hears the man he used to be calling out from the grave where he'd buried him 3 years ago. For the first time since his capture, Kenji Nakamura begins to cry. The tears come slowly at first, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Kenji tries to stop them, pressing his palms against his eyes so hard that stars explode behind his eyelids. He's a soldier of the Empire. He's a warrior who has stared death in the face 100 times without flinching. Warriors don't cry. Warriors don't break. But the harder he fights against the tears, the faster they come. 3 years of suppressed grief, 3 years of buried humanity, 3 years of denying that the man who once taught children to sing Christmas carols even existed. It all comes pouring out at once. His shoulders shake with silent sobs that he can't control, and for the first time since his plane went down in flames over the Solomon Islands, Kenji Nakamura remembers what it feels like to be human. The other prisoners in the barracks pretend not to notice. They've learned to give each other privacy in their darkest moments, understanding that survival sometimes requires brief periods of complete emotional collapse. But one man watches from across the room, Hiroshi Tanaka, a former merchant marine who's been Kenji's closest thing to a friend in this place, though neither would ever use that word. Hiroshi has seen Kenji at his worst, during the nightmares that wake him screaming, during the long periods of silent rage when he won't speak for days, during the planning sessions for escape attempts that they all know are hopeless. But he's never seen Kenji cry. Not once. And watching it happen now, Hiroshi feels something shift in his own chest, like ice cracking on a river in spring. Outside, the Christmas singing continues. "O Come, All Ye Faithful" drifts through the windows, followed by the first Noel. But Wheeler doesn't sing in Japanese again. Somehow, he seems to understand that what is already done is enough. That sometimes a single moment of unexpected grace is more powerful than hours of persuasion. Kenji wipes his eyes with the sleeve of his prison uniform and tries to regain his composure. But something fundamental has changed inside him, something that can't be put back the way it was. The crack in his armor has become a fissure, and through that fissure, memories are flooding back like water through a broken dam. He remembers the last Christmas before the war, 1940, when his students performed their concert for the entire village. Little Yuki had insisted on singing Silent Night in English, even though she could barely pronounce the words. She stood on a wooden box so she could be seen over the other children, her small voice trembling with nerves but never wavering in determination. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Her pronunciation was terrible. She said bright like burrito and calm like karumu. But Father Matthews had tears in his eyes as he played the accompaniment on his ancient portable organ, and even the adults who understood no English were wiping their eyes by the time she finished. After the concert, Kenji had found Yuki crying behind the school building. When he asked what was wrong, she told him she was afraid she'd embarrassed him with her bad English. He'd knelt down to her level, put his hands on her small shoulders, and told her something he'd never forgotten. "Yuki-chan, the most beautiful music isn't perfect. It's honest. And you sang with more honesty than anyone I've ever heard." Now, sitting in this frozen American prison camp, Kenji realizes that Private Wheeler's Japanese pronunciation hadn't been perfect either. There were subtle differences, slight inflections that marked him as a foreigner. But like little Yuki's English, it had been honest. More than honest, it had been loving. And that love had somehow reached across an ocean of hatred and found the part of Kenji's heart he thought had died on a burning aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific. The singing outside grows quieter as the guards finish their informal concert and return to their duties. But Kenji can't sleep. He lies on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment when Wheeler's voice had shifted from English to Japanese. It wasn't just the language switch that had broken something open inside him. It was the realization that his enemy had taken the time to learn his language, to understand his culture, to treat it with respect rather than contempt. For 3 years, Kenji has survived on hatred. Hatred for the Americans who shot him down, hatred for the guards who keep him imprisoned, hatred for a world that had forced him to abandon everything gentle in himself and become a weapon pointed at other human beings. That hatred has kept him alive through interrogations, through solitary confinement, through the crushing despair of knowing he might never see Japan again. But hatred, Kenji is beginning to realize, is exhausting. It takes enormous energy to maintain that level of rage, to wake up every morning and choose to see everyone around you as an enemy worth killing. And after 3 years, he's simply too tired to keep carrying it. As the night deepens and the barracks grow quiet except for the snoring of sleeping prisoners and the distant footsteps of guards on patrol, Kenji makes a decision that will change the rest of his life. He sits up on his mattress, pulls a small piece of paper from his hiding place inside his pillow, and begins to write. The paper is precious. He's been saving it for months, planning to use it for a map during his next escape attempt. But now he has a different purpose in mind. Using a stubby pencil he'd stolen from the camp office, he begins to write in careful English. To the American soldier who sang in Japanese, My name is Kenji Nakamura. I was a teacher before the war. You reminded me of someone I knew in Japan, someone who also loved languages and music. I would like to thank you for remembering that Japanese is a language of beauty, not just a language of war. If you are willing, I would like to teach you the correct pronunciation of the words you sang tonight. In return, perhaps you could help me remember who I used to be before I became a prisoner. Christmas morning arrives cold and grey, with snow falling steadily outside the barracks windows. Kenji wakes to find the folded paper near his feet, and his heart begins to race as he realizes what it means. Someone, presumably the guard who sang in Japanese, has responded to a message he hasn't even sent yet. He unfolds the paper carefully, reading the perfectly formed characters with growing amazement. The handwriting is clearly that of a foreigner. The brushstrokes are slightly too deliberate, too careful, but the message is unmistakably heartfelt. More importantly, the grammar is flawless, the level of respect appropriate for the situation. This isn't someone who learned Japanese from a military phrasebook. This is someone who studied the language with genuine reverence for its complexity and beauty. Hiroshi notices the paper and raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. In prison, everyone has secrets, and the smart ones don't ask questions about things that might get them in trouble. But when Kenji shows him the message, Hiroshi's expression changes from curiosity to amazement. "This is impossible," Hiroshi whispers in Japanese. "No American soldier writes like this. Look at the character for peace, he's used the classical form, not the simplified one they teach to foreigners. And the level of formality is perfect. This man studied under a master." Kenji nods slowly. The quality of the writing confirms what he'd suspected the night before. This American guard isn't just someone who picked up a few phrases during the war. He's someone who lived in Japan, who studied the language and culture with the same dedication that Father Matthews had brought to his missionary work. For the rest of Christmas Day, Kenji carries both pieces of paper with him, his own unfinished message and Wheeler's Christmas greeting. During meals, during the daily prison account, during the long hours of enforced idleness, he finds himself touching his pocket to make sure they're still there, like talismans against despair. The other prisoners notice the change in him immediately. For 3 years, Kenji has been a coiled spring, ready to explode into violence at the slightest provocation. But today, he seems different. Quieter, but not in his usual dangerous way. More thoughtful. Several times, prisoners catch him staring out the window toward the guard tower, not with his usual calculating hostility, but with something that looks almost like curiosity. Wheeler, meanwhile, is dealing with his own internal struggle. He's broken a dozen regulations by communicating with a prisoner, and he knows that if Captain Morrison discovers what is done, he'll face court-martial at minimum. But something about the way Kenji had reacted to the Japanese singing has convinced Wheeler that there's more to this particular prisoner than meets the eye. During his afternoon rounds, Wheeler makes a point of passing close to Barrack 7. Through the window, he catches sight of Kenji sitting alone in his usual corner. But instead of the hard, predatory stare Wheeler has grown accustomed to, Kenji looks up and gives him the slightest of nods, barely perceptible, but unmistakably acknowledging. That evening, as Wheeler begins his night shift, he finds another folded paper tucked into the fence post where he'd thrown his Christmas message. His heart pounds as he unfolds it, using his flashlight to read Kenji's careful English. "Private Wheeler, I asked another guard your name. Thank you for your Christmas greeting. Your Japanese writing is very beautiful. I was a teacher before the war, and I would be honored to help you improve your pronunciation. In my village, we had an American missionary named Father Matthews who spoke Japanese like you do, with respect and love. You remind me of him, and of the man I used to be before I forgot that my enemies are also human beings. If you are willing, I would like to learn how to be that man again." Wheeler reads the message 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. The formal politeness, the reference to being a teacher, the admission that he'd forgotten his enemies were human, It all points to a profound shift in Kenji's worldview. But it's the final line that truly stuns Wheeler. I would like to learn how to be that man again. This isn't just a request for language lessons. This is a man asking for help in reclaiming his own soul. Wheeler spends the rest of his shift thinking about how to respond. He remembers his training in Japan, the patient monks who had taught him that true understanding comes not from words but from shared experience. He thinks about Father Matthews, whom he'd actually met briefly during his missionary work, a gentle man with laugh lines around his eyes and ink stains on his fingers from writing letters to friends around the world. Most importantly, he thinks about the choice facing him now. He can report Kenji's message to Captain Morrison, who will see it as evidence that the prisoner is trying to manipulate American guards. He can ignore it completely, maintaining the proper distance between captor and captive. Or he can do something that will change both their lives forever. He can respond with the same honesty and vulnerability that Kenji has shown him. By dawn, Wheeler has made his decision. Instead of a written message, he leaves something else at the fence post, a small, leather-bound book that he's carried with him since his missionary days. It's a collection of Japanese poetry, with English translations on facing pages. Inside the front cover, he's written a note in both languages. Kenji-san, this book belonged to a Buddhist monk named Master Yoshida, who taught me that wisdom has no nationality and compassion has no borders. He gave it to me when I left Japan, saying that someday I might meet someone who needed its teachings more than I did. I think that day has come. The poem on page 47 reminds me of your village and the man you described yourself as being. Perhaps it will remind you as well. Page 47 contains a haiku by Matsu Basho. An ancient pond. A frog leaps in. The sound of water. Below the poem, Master Yoshida had written in fading ink, "In the stillness before the leap, the frog is already transformed. In the silence after the splash, the pond remembers what it was before." When Kenji finds the book and reads this particular poem, he understands immediately what Wheeler is telling him. The war has been the frog, leaping into the pond of his life and disrupting everything that was peaceful and still. But the pond remembers. Somewhere beneath the ripples of violence and hatred and 3 years of hardened survival, the man he used to be is still there, waiting to resurface. That night, for the first time since his capture, Kenji doesn't plan an escape. Instead, he sits by the window reading poetry and remembering what it feels like to be someone other than a prisoner of war. From the guard tower, Wheeler watches the light in Barrack 7 and knows that something extraordinary has begun. Not just a friendship between enemies, but something larger, a small rebellion against the war itself, a quiet insistence that humanity can survive even the most dehumanizing circumstances. What neither man knows yet is that their correspondence has been noticed by others. Captain Morrison has observed Wheeler's increasing interest in Barrack 7. Several of the Japanese prisoners have noticed the change in Kenji's behavior and are beginning to whisper among themselves about what might have caused it. More significantly, word is beginning to spread through both the American guards and the Japanese prisoners that something unusual is happening in Camp Carson. Guards who've grown tired of treating other human beings as animals are starting to wonder if Wheeler's approach might be more effective than Morrison's iron discipline. Prisoners who've survived by maintaining their hatred for all things American are beginning to question whether that hatred is still necessary. On New Year's Eve, 1944, as both men stand on opposite sides of the fence that divides them, looking up at the same stars and breathing the same cold mountain air, they both make the same resolution: to spend the new year learning how to see enemies as human beings, how to find bridges across impossible divides, and how to prove that even in wartime, the better angels of human nature can triumph over the demons that war creates. Neither knows it yet, but their quiet rebellion against hatred will spread far beyond the confines of Camp Carson. By war's end, their story will become legend among POW camps across America. The story of how a Christmas carol sung in a foreign language reminded two enemies that they were both, first and foremost, human beings who had simply forgotten how to see each other clearly. And in years to come, when historians study the small acts of grace that helped heal the wounds between Japan and America after the war's end, many will point to a cold December night in Colorado when an American guard decided to sing Silent Night in Japanese, and a hardened Japanese pilot decided to listen with his heart instead of his hatred. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with songs. And sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by armies, but by two men who choose to see each other as human beings, one Christmas carol at a time.